In 2001, the United Nations hosted a World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. There was a parallel conference for NGOs, and those conferences are infamous because participants circulated copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an anti-Semitic fabrication that blames Jews for all the world's ills. At the conferences, there was an attempt to revive an annulled UN ruling that falsely equates Zionism with racism. Jewish and Israeli speakers were silenced and bullied, and boycott and demonisation campaigns were launched, with the explicit objective of a complete and total isolation of Israel. The UN Human Rights Commissioner at the time, Mary Robson, told the BBC there was a horrible anti-Semitism present. The United Nations and NGOs' stated agenda to combat racism had been hijacked and turned on its head. The conference was a racist attack on Jews and on Israel. A second conference was planned in 2009 and a third in 2011, both with a similar agenda of attacking Israel and perpetuating anti-Semitic tropes. One of the first speakers in the 2009 conference was Iranian President MAHMOUD AHMADINEJAD. He called Israel totally racist and denied the Holocaust. Those conferences were boycotted by New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States and other democracies to their credit. Unfortunately, the anti-Semitism continues at the UN, with a grossly disproportionate number of condemnatory rulings against Israel. And there are many NGOs who claim to stand for human rights, but work to undermine the rights of Jews to live in their indigenous land. Those NGOs have turned their attention from real human rights abuses to delegitimizing and demonizing Israel, and holding it to a standard expected of no other country. The old anti-Semitic tropes blaming Jews for the ills of the world are now projected onto Israel as the Jewish state. One of the organizations involved in this newest form of the oldest hatred is Amnesty International, a group which used to stand up for all human rights. The once good name of Amnesty has been undone by a series of outrageous incidents. In recent years, Amnesty International has defended terrorists, whitewashed abuses of power at the United Nations Human Rights Council, and has done little to no campaigning on the rising number of violent anti-Semitic incidents around the world. In 2002, Amnesty falsely accused Israel of carrying out war crimes and massacres of Palestinian civilians. They alleged more than 500 civilians were killed, but in reality, 52 Palestinians died, and the majority of those were combatants, terrorists killed in urban conflict with the IDF. Amnesty's false allegations of an Israeli massacre are similar to falsehoods in their latest report. Their latest report calls on individuals and companies and governments to stop trading with Jews who live in disputed land, and for governments to make this boycott mandatory in law. This is just the latest attack in a long war intent on turning public opinion against Israel and bringing about its economic and political isolation. It is a direct continuation of the racist and bigoted actions that New Zealand and other democracies stood against in previous years at the UN conferences. Amnesty International claims that Jews living in Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, constitutes a war crime. Their claim is completely false. Jews have lived in the land for millennia, except when Jordan ethnically cleansed the area under its occupation from 1948 to 1967. The 1922 mandate for Palestine is the only binding resolution in international law and does not make it illegal for Jews to live in their indigenous land. Furthermore, Israeli and Arab Palestinian leaders agreed that Israel would totally control parts of the West Bank, the parts where the settlement blocks are, under the 1993 Oslo Accords. As part of their report, Amnesty uses a case study of the Bedouin village of Khan al-Amir, claiming that the villagers were cruelly forced from their lands. The reality, however, is very different. First of all, every structure in Khan al-Amir was built illegally in the first place. And more importantly, members of the nomadic clan that lived there agreed to move to houses that Israel built for free. Houses that were connected to municipality plumbing and electricity. Houses that would provide the residents and their families a much better quality of life. But Amnesty does not care about those families, nor does Amnesty truly care about Palestinians, because boycotts of Jewish businesses hurt Palestinians who often work in those companies for much better salaries and conditions than they would find in corporates run under Palestinian Authority governance. Palestinian human rights advocate Bassem Eid has identified that organisations that promote boycotts of Israel are doing so at the expense of the Palestinian people. So while Amnesty International puts its energies into making claims of alleged Israeli infractions, the Palestinian people, much like the Arab world, are making it clear that they will not tolerate the rejectionist policies, corruption and human rights abuses of the Palestinian leadership in Gaza and the West Bank. If Amnesty was truly interested in human rights, they would be putting pressure on the Palestinian leadership to negotiate with Israel. Instead, Amnesty is giving an excuse for Palestinian leaders to stay out of any bona fide talks. If Amnesty was fair-minded, they might be looking at other situations of disputed lands and applying similar standards to Russia, Turkey, China, and other alleged occupiers. But Amnesty has singled out Israel. They want it to be illegal for tourists to visit the land and tour the Old City if the guide is Jewish, or if there's a Jewish business involved. They want to strip Jews of their right to visit the lands of their ancestors, let alone live there. That is racism, and we should not tolerate it. Settlements are one of several issues that should be resolved by negotiations, like those that took place during the Oslo Accords. International actors should not continue to condemn one side of this dispute while remaining silent on the other. The disputed territory is not, and never has been, Palestinian, because there has never been a sovereign Palestinian state. By declaring East Jerusalem and the West Bank to be occupied Palestinian territory, Amnesty and others give Arab Palestinian leaders a reason to continue their refusal to enter negotiations. Instead of the tired excuse of blaming the occupation, leaders and thinkers need to listen to the people and recognise that it takes two willing parties to come together and discuss a future in order to find solutions. Sadly, Amnesty is advocating for division rather than unity. New Zealand and other democracies need to decide if they'll continue to uphold the principles shown in 2009 and 2011, standing against anti-Semitism like they did at the Durban conferences, or if they wish to join the mob and push peace further away by seeking to isolate Israel and reward terror. Amnesty International has made its choice, but we need not follow. We must show moral fibre and hope that Amnesty make amends. I'm Dr. David Cuman for the Israel Institute of New Zealand.